Kasia. While the cool girls and the awesome boys were saving the world and painting the town red, Kasia was raising her child in the room behind the kitchen in her parents' apartment. However angry she may have been at Adam and his ilk, a child is something no philosophy can replace. And this child was completely and exclusively her own, if also its grandmother's and grandfather's, of course. This additional and widespread model of the nuclear family, in which a ruined daughter mends her ways for the rest of her life, depends entirely on her parents because she has no more room for error. There is nowhere to err. As Kasia was a healthy, strong, smart girl, she managed everything like most girls in this situation, without thought or consideration, simply by doing everything that needed doing one day at a time. This awfully long time, from the first moment the child raises its head, starts turning in bed, until it crawls around on all fours, is no more than 5 months really. A few months later, the infant is already toddling around the room. A mother is happy to spend these first few years more or less at her child's tempo, which means that normal people's time ceases to exist for her, and she enters into her newborn's utterly different, limitless time, where minutes, hours, and days have no meaning. Everything is only pure existence, here and now, and even though this time is endless, a paralyzed moment in which a woman sits like an unshakable Madonna, bundle in her lap, around them a conspicuous glow. Strange stings of reality enter their private time, and it turns out that the child is already 3. It is already throwing flour from cabinets onto the floor, tearing the pages out of picture books, and it can't be left unwatched for even a moment. It is potty trained, thank God, and this is of course a spectacle that can last for hours. The child sits on the potty quite contentedly at the start, and then gets annoyed and announces with conviction, "It's not coming," and it's been some days since the last potty. Kasia gets nervous. She lets the child off the bowl in order to set him back on in a little bit. "Let's try again," she says, giving him a new book off the shelf, as well as some favorite toys. She waits patiently for half an hour, all the while distracting him from the nuisance at hand with new diversions. Still nothing. Now Kasia turns to old tricks. She heads for the kitchen, where she gets the thin, leftover strip of a used bar of soap out from under the sink and, with a knife, whittles a sort of rod or baton out of it, thicker on one end and thinner on the other, something like the fang on a saber-toothed tiger. To hue and cry, she sets the child on his stomach on the floor and pushes the soap baton up his bum. She keeps him down like this for a little bit, so that the rod can do its job, and then pops the anguished child back onto the potty and says, "Well, how about now? Now the poopy just has to come out." There is a plunk. "Sit for a bit longer," Kasia says. "It'll come soon." Eventually she lets her son free, but the pot is as dry as it ever was. There's not even a drop of pee, only a nasty fang lying accusingly at the bottom. What on earth is going on? Mom gets worried and, alas, cross. She gets out dried plums, soured milk, and looks around for some time longer for any other home remedies for constipation. The boy whimpers dejectedly all through the night, and his crying wakes her. Half the time she carries him about at her breast, and half the time sets him back down to bed. And so they stumble through the night, scarce little doses here and there. In the morning, it starts all over again. Hours of sitting on the potty, a grouchy, weepy child, and a mother who has lost her patience. Again, a sleepless night of hysterical weeping. Kasia finally realizes that the boy hasn't actually done either business in the past few days. His peeing is out of sorts as well. Quick, quick, she packs the tot into his clothes and heads off to the doctor. Heavens, no mother can stomach the fact that her children get sick. How unspeakably horrible it is to sit by the door of a doctor's office in a long line of other worried mothers waiting with their snotty, coughing, anxious children. There are at least 10 there. Some are newborns, other bigger babes. Some brats are running up and down the hallways screaming, falling over now and then. And it is all moms, moms, moms wearing out their nerves there, and not a single dad. Finally, they get into the examination room, and the doctor hears Kasia explain. The child is stripped down and examined with tongue depressor and stethoscope. Whatever the worry is, doctors will always go through one and the same motions. And this regular pediatrician, who had only trained to treat colds, found no problem and offered no advice. Beginning to despair, Kasia declared that she would not leave until they treated him. "He hasn't peed. Look for yourself. Touch his bladder," she said. "That's not normal. What difference does it make if his throat isn't red and he doesn't have a fever? He's kept me up at night crying for a week. After some begging, she managed to get him sent to a children's hospital. She simply fought the referral out of them. She even managed to get the right to accompany, an exception made if the child was still young enough and needed constant supervision. Whatever else being a mother is, children's illnesses are the greatest cross to bear. Pani Eva Maskevich must have recognized Kasia at a glance. She and Adam, an asthenic child, had spent plenty of time running from clinic to clinic, dealing with his respiratory tract. That is, he was as snotty as a horse. What didn't they try? They put hot-boiled eggs in socks, which Adam was directed to hold against his sinuses until they cooled off. It's surprising how long a boiled egg can stay hot. It's at least half an hour. Lumps of rock salt were put to the same use. The salt was put on the stove and heated before being wrapped up in a rag, and Adam was told to put these clods over every empty sinus there was in him, upper sinuses, lower sinuses, and God knows what else. Or oats, also heated on the stove, stuffed into an old stocking, a rough, brown sock made of capron cloth and full of hot, nasty flakes. With this oat serpent around his neck, little Adam had to lie in bed to recuperate. Other well-known treatments include garlic up the nose, garlic with honey, not up the nose, or honey with onion and milk, mustard plasters, mustard foot baths, baking soda in steaming water, blue light, a herring on the neck, just to give a little idea of the traumas of childhood. But home remedies had no effect. His runny nose lasted months and months, practically years. They were sent from one doctor to the next so that a host of sharp medical objects could be stuck up his nose. There was a kind of pliers that pushed his nostrils open enough to see all the way up. One doctor thought that they ought to put tampons into his nasal passages. That might help. The event went something like this. The boy was set in a big wide leather chair, his head fixed still, and then they soaked cotton fiber in some medicine before wrapping it around 2 metal screws to make tampons before drilling these rods into his head through his nose. Like Rhino at Home, a game in which they wrapped a match in cotton fiber and then stuck it into a thick yellow salve and then up the nose. "Let's play Rhino now," Mother Eva coaxed him. Rhino was child's play next to the horrible augurs that prowled the exam room. They rhinoed Adam for 6 months, once a week. It was absolutely no use. The next otorhinolaryngologist decided that polyps were to blame for the interminable distemper. "It can't be," Eva was categorical. "They were taken out when he was 4. The thought sent a shudder up her spine. Back then, polyps were cut out in a living line in a coldly lit but somehow still dark corridor. In one direction was an endless line of mothers and their sniffling children, and in the other was a door from which a dyed blonde nurse would stick her head out and call, "Next!" Inured to her butchery, the polyp ripper doctor was an older woman with thick wrinkles around her red mouth who wasted no time before strapping little Adam into a chair and tearing the benign formations out of his nose. The blood flowed hard, of course, and in the corridor, Eva pressed her nails wrathfully into her chair as she listened to Adam crying inside. The nurse soon brought the boy out to his mother and gave him over with the words, "A very bad boy, a crybaby, such a big boy, and he cries." Eva grabbed Adam into her lap. She'd have wanted to get out of this horrible place immediately, but they still had to wait for the blood to stop, and the doctor had to look them over once more before they left. Pani Eva did not want to live through such traumas again, even if the boy was now 10 and would likely bear up more like a man. "If it's a tendency for polyps, they can grow back several times," the doctor explained. "If we cut his respiratory tract clean, it'll reduce the likelihood of inflammation in the sinuses. Right now, the issue is chronic, and I don't see how it would have improved under the conservative treatments he's had up until now. Don't worry, we don't do this with local anesthesia anymore. He'll have a general anesthetic and some days to recover quietly in the hospital." The trip to the hospital was organized for the spring school vacation so that Adam would not have to miss valuable time in class, something that had already flown up the chimney during his countless sick days. Eva and Adam trudged over to the admissions desk, and the boy was taken into the hospital with his slippers, colored pencils, and Jarosław Iwaszkiewicz's Mother Joan of the Angels, which wasn't age-appropriate reading. Eva assured him that she would definitely come see him immediately after the operation, which she did, of course. She stepped hopefully out of the big glass doors and went straight in towards the women at the coat check. Only now she saw angry signs glued up everywhere. These had not been there the day before. Patient visitation prohibited on account of flu. She implored the little old woman who took her coat. This woman served only the people at the clinic, who were allowed to visit despite of the flu for whatever reason. Please, can you take this package to my son in the ear, nose, and throat department, and tell him they won't let me in to see him. She silently pressed a zloty or two in the little lady's palm and sat down in a chair to wait. There is no ghastlier feeling than sitting in front of a cement leviathan and knowing that you and your worries are nothing to it. The thought that she had had to break her promise tore at her, even if a heavenly judge might have said that there was a force majeure at play. To top it all off, the runny nose went nowhere. The next doctor looked at Adam, waved his hand, and declared wisely, "I think he'll grow out of this condition." And the doctor was right. Starting from puberty, the runny nose afflicted Adam as often as it did any other Pole. Kasia and her child landed in a hospital with several buildings, A, B, C, D, E, F, and wings, surgery, intensive care, infectious disease, etc. And from then on, her memories are very hazy. There are very many white coats, very many green-gray corridors, and in these corridors are an endless number of doors, X-rays behind one, an EKG behind another, ultrasound behind a third, a neurologist behind a fourth, rooms for electrotherapy, injections, bandaging, floors and floors of rooms. Each had its own several coats, eyeglasses on noses, and the grave looking over of documents. In the center of all that was Kasia, utterly mute, and her child, crying almost unceasingly. Eventually, they removed the urine from his bladder with a catheter and did so every single day. He did not himself pee anymore. When he was catheterized, he was also hooked up to mysterious machines by even more wires and clamps all over his body. These fixed, invisible, ethereal bodily impulses onto rolls of paper. Thinking back, didn't they even do some horrible experiment in which they gave him lots to drink and then just watched to see if anything came out the other end? No, she probably imagined that after the fact. It couldn't have been like that. Kasia understood that the doctors knew nothing and were just as confused as she was, which made them even angrier that this was some extremely rare neurological disorder that had disabled the nerves that should otherwise have signaled the need to void the bladder and the intestine. To top things off, one doctor told her that, in his opinion, half of the boy's face was also no longer reacting correctly. So he had the child grimace again and again while simultaneously poking around his eyes, brows, cheeks, and nose with a little baton. After looking for a moment at the object of his investigation, he turned to the nurse and rattled off some notes to be written up in the case history. He and the nurse were a strange pair, seeming to deal in something bizarre and occult, and they did not need Kasia, who was entirely extraneous, to observe their performance. The doctors were at a complete loss and could not even name the disease. It stayed that way. They diagnosed vaguely dysfunction of the nervous system and neuropathy. Kasia suddenly heard the words brain tumor spoken at a whisper. Utterly resigned, she stood with her child in his strange sickness in front of a panel of doctors, and the words she heard simply slipped in and out of her mind. All the strength had gone from her body. She now wanted only to cry, and forget everything, or to call anyone and everyone and lament, wail, howl, and hear comforting words, however faint and empty. Just hear the voice of someone who wasn't some nasty doctor, but a real person. Finally, some wiser coat decided, we'll do some brain examinations all the same. But might we not just try treating the bladder with some electrotherapy? Sometimes simple solutions work too. You have to try. There was a big, clunky silver phone on the wall in the nurse's cubbyhole. Kasia called her mother, because no one else came to mind. They said a brain tumor, she whispered into the receiver. Will he die? Her mother asked. This made Kasia angry. How can your own mother say of her own daughter's child, will he die, like he's a dog? Her anger made her capable again, and she woke from her frozen state, determined to fight to the last drop of blood. No one is going to die. You die, you ancient witch. How can you think such a stupid thing? Kasia's child recovered. The electrotherapy helped. They did it for an extremely long time, maybe 3 weeks or so. They found no brain tumor. The sickness wasn't diagnosed, and everything passed like a bad dream. In the fall, Kasia enrolled in university for molecular biology. She wanted to become a scientist.